I am ready when you are.
Good afternoon. I'm calling to order the November 30th meeting for Environmental Matters Committee. For the record, all the members are present. Alderwoman Finlayson is joining us remotely. Unfortunately, I think can she hear us?
Yes, she can.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
I'm afraid I can't hear Rob. He's very, very, very soft.
He always is.
Yeah, right. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hear me, feel me.
I hear you. Is that Rob singing?
Yeah,
It is. You can
doing
hear
the Who.
So I need. Can they boost my mic? How's the volume on this now?
Much better. Much better.
Okay. All right. I think we got it sorted out. All right. I just did the roll call. Is there a motion to approve the, is there a motion to amend the agenda to remove O2523 and R4723? They're
Yes, so moved.
no longer needed, I believe, because we already took action at the council.
Second.
No, but these have already, the council's already voted on these, so they're no longer needed at all. So whatever we do is irrelevant. Yeah. All right, is there,
I moved.
okay, is there a second? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, motion carries. The agenda is modified and adopted. Next up, we have, approval of the minutes from November 1st. Is there a motion?
Move approval of the minutes?
Second, if I was at that meeting, but I'm not sure I was. Was I there?
Yeah, it says you were. You got credit for it.
Then I second it then.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. And on to legislative action. First up is, and before this, Alderwoman Finlayson, I think you had a time restriction today, is that correct?
I do. I have to leave at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock your time, I think.
And I need to be over at OEM by 5 o'clock.
Oh, yeah, well, we'll definitely be out of here by then. Yeah, 4 o'clock, that should be fine. Thank you, Alderwoman. All right, so first up, O2823, which is city noise prohibitions and enforcement. And let's see, this legislation, and Deputy City Manager Guile, could you join us at the table? I think we may have some questions. I want to point out for the committee that there are 3 amendments. The second amendment, which is mine, I'm withdrawing. So if you could make a note of that, Ms. Jackson. And so I will be making a motion for the third amendment. But we also have a first one to discuss at some point. So with that said, are there any questions from the committee? You want to kick off for this discussion?
May I ask, are we dealing with Amendment 1 first and then, or what are we discussing?
Yes, either, I guess we might as well
I'd
just,
like to start with the ordinance.
we could start with the ordinance and then move to the amendments.
Okay. I don't have any questions at this point.
Okay, Alderman Arnett, I saw your hand.
So I alerted the chair that I do in fact have questions. And my questions relate, am I on? Yeah, to both the ordinance text, but also the staff report. So on the ordinance itself, in page 2, there's a table that is a very helpful table. It shows measuring these decibel levels in various settings. But my experience with this has been those measurements are not made. And in fact, when you look at the staff report and you listen to the police, they don't carry decibel meters. And so when they're called to the scene for excess noise, they see their assignment as mitigating the issue rather than measuring the decibels and issuing a citation. But I think this speaks to my more general concern about the legislation, which is not the intent. I fully subscribe to the intent and am a co-sponsor of it. But I'm reminded that we so often pass ordinances with the best of intent that just are not enforceable. So I would turn to page 3, the sound level on the water. How in the world are we going to enforce that? Are we going to have a police officer running along the shore with a decibel meter? Are we going to have the police boat be called out and measure decibel levels? Again, I understand the intent, and actually quite often here early in the morning, the pilot boat leaving Back Creek and roaring out to the bay with what I'm sure is more than the level of decibels. But I think my concern about this throughout is how do we enforce it? If you go on page 3 again, and this may get amended out and therefore not be a problem, but what's prohibited under high-frequency sound, first of all, I don't think we define that, but, and I do have some questions about what that high-frequency sound, but it says permits issued by Public Works Department may be granted to individuals or groups, but there's no criteria. Is this something that has generated the criteria as a part of their rules and regulations? And if so, I believe we passed a couple years ago legislation that says those rules and regulations need to come before the Rules Committee for a review and be promulgated on the city's website. I couldn't find any rules to that effect. And again, I'm not questioning the intent, I think the good intent of this legislation, but I am questioning whether or not it's enforceable. And with this high-pitched noise, I think there's 2 different kinds of things that could be involved here. Some machinery emits high-pitched sound that's not really audible to us, but is a natural aspect of the equipment. That's one thing. But I've heard there are also people who use high-pitched sound to deter deer and also to aggravate or whatever neighbors' dogs. And to me, that's a high-pitched sound device that is used with the intent to produce high-pitched sound for some purpose which may or may not be legitimate. But that's not really it's not really addressed in terms of the high-pitched sound. And then the last question, and this was very thoroughly raised in the staff report, is the staffing for this. Once again, and this is a discussion we've had with the deputy, or the assistant city manager, but if we don't have the staff to enforce these things, I don't think they're going to get enforced. And so I am questioning whether we should pass, once again, legislation that is not truly enforceable. I just have one last question. There's a whole section on the gas-powered leaf blowers, which I will say personally drive me crazy. I think they're very noisy. And I also watch them blow grass and leaves into the gutter to get flushed down into our storm drains. But my question is, this is a noise ordinance, and so have we really compared gas-powered blowers to, I presume the alternative is electric power blowers? And I put this question to you, Mr. Chair, earlier today. I don't know, but if it's a noise ordinance, not a gasoline usage ordinance, it seems to me that we ought to know about the noise generated by leaf blowers in general. So again, I really want to emphasize, I am a sponsor of this. I subscribe to the intent of this legislation, but I have some real concerns about enforceability and some of the details in the legislation.
All right, thank you, Alderman. I know, before I turn it over to staff, I think it looks like they had a response. Just a few quick responses on that. As far as the definition for high frequency, I do agree, which is why my third amendment would remove that language and simplify it and include a bit of a definition by specifying that it's high frequency sound emitters designed and used for pest deterrence. Although, because I think that would encompass those kind of devices that are used for deter wildlife, but also to deter, and well, actually, frankly, maybe that definition needs to be reworded to incorporate barking deterrence, because I think that's another way it's used. We'll see if our law office has anything else to say on that one. So we have a couple questions to staff. I know you said you agree with the intention. Just to clarify, as far as the enforcement from the water, I think that is a good question. The intent in that proposing this is to help address, we've been granting leases to, what's referred to as party boats on our creeks. And I believe the way our code's currently written, I don't think we can do enforcement on the water. So this would allow us to do noise enforcement on the water. But the good question is, how would we, if staff knows exactly how that process would work?
Especially since, if I could just interject, on the first page of the staff report, it says, each department has a single sound meter. And so I imagine when the noise is being generated, I would hope, there's this big scurry to run back to the office and get the sound meter and hope that the sound is still going on when they come back with the meter. But again, I think it's the weakness of, can we really enforce these things without more staff and more people carrying decibel meters? So again, I just want to inject that.
Did staff want to respond?
We did have a citation was issued by the Harbor Master's office on a noise violation, which our Assistant City Attorney can comment on. Oh, yes, I'm on. Jackie Guile, Deputy City Manager of Resilience and Sustainability. So the Harbor Master, in the past several months, had issued a noise violation, which our Assistant City Attorney has had to handle, and he has some comments on that, on enforceability.
they're not extensive, and they're all pretty consistent with all of your concerns, Alderman. I'm not sure the citation, this was about 6 months ago, but I'm not even sure the harbor master's office had a decibel reader. I think it was just kind of a, on the spot call. I will say the party to which the citation was issued was a frequent flyer down in the at City Dock, so it might be beneficial to allocate. I agree with you. I think the intent here is noble, but the practicality of enforcing this across the city with maybe 3 decibel readers that we know of is just very far-fetched. Applying them to specific areas, I don't know how we could work this to really, enforce it in these particular areas where it's a larger issue. Might be something to look into, but I'll just validate all of your concerns. In practice, this is very hard to actually enforce. I will add that the case was dropped. I couldn't establish enough evidence, in my view, to actually even meet whatever sound ordinance we were prosecuting. I just didn't have the evidence to actually show that it had been violated.
So in what way?
I'm not sure I had a decibel reading. I'm not sure there was one available at the time that the enforcing officer actually issued the ticket. I don't doubt that it, would have been beyond whatever the permitted decibel level is, but if I recall correctly, I'm not sure a decibel reader was involved, or it might have been, if one was involved, it may have been a private individual's decibel reader that they actually went out and bought themselves and showed the officer, and it was just too attenuated of a chain of causation for me to.
What time of day was this?
I believe, now that I think of it, 2 are coming to mind. The one at City Dock did not involve a decibel reader. One in Eastport did, but that was a private decibel reader. That was an outdoor sanctioned event, I want to say, whereas the City Dock violation was just a private individual on their vessel tied up to the pier.
What time of day was that?
That was at night.
Because I do think this is one of the larger questions for staff as far as enforcement. It's stated that, I think when I spoke with the assistant city manager, stated that it's going to be handled by the police department or code enforcement, which is currently in planning and zoning. But the reason I ask about time of day is because I think my understanding is things in the evening are going to be handled by the police because code enforcement's not on duty. Things during the day are going to be handled by code enforcement. And I also bring that up because it's different, for these types of violations, the boats, I think, are going to typically be probably evenings, right? But I think these are things that's going to be handled differently. The gas-powered leaf blower, that's going to be a daytime issue mostly, and so that's going to be done by different staff, either by code enforcement or by environmental compliance inspectors, which are in Public Works. But, there's also, with those inspectors, we only have 2 environmental compliance inspectors, so we could theoretically have 1 decibel reader for both of them, or 1 in the office. They pick up when they call out. For police, it's a little more difficult because they're traveling around and it's whoever's closest, and we don't want to give all of them a meter. So I don't know what makes sense from staff standpoint. We've talked about before having like an on-call or after hours inspector. I think we've done that periodically over the years. It would make sense because I don't think the volume of calls are going to be high for either of these. Maybe initially when they get started as far as the leaf blowers, but I think as the deputy city manager did for the foam ban, right, you gave people a lot of warnings early on and just like a grace period. So that also is not going to require a full enforcement or decibel reader necessarily. So I don't know. I guess I'm not answering much of anything with my comments.
I would say that the gas-powered leaf blower prohibition, that's an outright prohibition. So that's easy. That's something that's going to happen during the day. You might have some random people that want to do it at night, but doubtful. And code enforcement can easily address that because that's cut and dry. That's just an outright prohibition. But it's the high frequency sound which you have to measure, which often happens in the evening or at night.
Not if it's amended as proposed, there won't be any kind of decibel reading involved. It's just a prohibition on using those kind of devices. So the same thing like you said before with the leaf blowers, that should be easy. So I guess the enforcement question would come down to how we do it for the water-based,
Right.
right? So I guess that's where the question is going to come.
Well, not necessarily, Mr. Chair. If you look at the staff report on the second page, the first, it's the paragraph in the middle, it says, the city staff will likely have to rely on overall sound level limits outlined in the table. They need to rely on overall limits reinforced by the fact that sound meters used by the city do not show sound level by frequency anyway. That implies to me there's different kinds of sound meters, decibel readers. And I guess this takes me back kind of to some of the comments made by the city attorney. Are we talking about noise, or are we now parsing this down to specific noise? So noise generated by boats out on the water is one kind of noise, and noise generated by parties that happen to be on the shore, say on a party boat, or in the middle of a block, say in a restaurant area. And so I actually feel like we need to be a little more precise. Are we going after all sounds? In which case, if we're going after high-frequency sounds, which, as you said earlier today, can cause migraines, I've heard complaints about it harassing dogs in the neighborhood. It's not clear to me that we have the equipment, the correct equipment to even measure all of these different sound things. So my major plea is, if we're going to do legislation, let's do legislation that really can be enforced and that we really do equip the staff. I have the same problem with the impact statement here. Once again, the staff report says we're going to increase the level of burden on the staff, and the fiscal impact note says no fiscal impact. I mean, which is it? That's why we actually wanted to get the staffing impact report.
I see the Alderwoman's hand, and I just want to respond quickly because I want to make sure it's clear in the legislation. If it's amended, the enforcement will be much easier because you won't need to use a sound meter because it's just outright prohibiting the use of certain devices, regardless of what kind of sound is coming
But
through.
doesn't that speak to the city attorney's problem with the court case where I think there were two different cases, and one of them was dependent upon somebody downloading a decibel meter on their own phone. Is that going to stand up if we're trying to adjudicate? We issue a citation that gets appealed?
Well, do want to get that answered. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Well, my comment had to do with the decibel readers. So I'd be interested in hearing what how the attorney responds to what Alderman Arnett is saying. And then I'll ask my question.
Let me be a little more specific in the situation I encountered.
Could you pull your mic just a little closer?
I don't think there's any issue with a decibel reader, be it from a code enforcement officer or a police officer or a private member, so long as they are available to appear for these citation trials. It just so happened in the one that I recall, it was a private individual's decibel reader. And there were other issues with that case. Candidly, I can't recall what else was wrong with it, but it got me thinking at that point in time. A lot of the issues you brought up earlier came to mind, wherein that it would have been nice if that was a code enforcement officer handing me a city-issued decibel reader. It would have just been a lot smoother of a case to try over what is in reality a $200 fine. It led me to think it'd be nice if there were multiple decibel readers across the city. And I'm sure the police department has a fair share of their own, or at least I hope they do. But it became very apparent at that point in time that, decibel readers weren't just sitting around in every municipal building. And chances are, from the sounds of it, if there's more than 3 leaf blowers blowing at one time, we might only have 2 decibel readers. I don't know what sort of cost and time.
Again, we won't need them for leaf blowers because they're just going to be
Right,
prohibited.
excuse me. Forget, other than leaf blowers, if there's more sound, which is, arguably, you could put the decibel reader up to see if it's a violation. If they're happening all over town and we've only got 2 decibel readers, enforcement's going to be a serious issue.
Yeah. Alderwoman, still have the floor.
Well, I guess my question is about the decibel readers. Here's the historical reference, and Alderman Arnett, you may recall when there was an effort to stop motorcycles from coming into downtown Annapolis. And there were residents who purchased their own decibel readers on Duke of Gloucester and indicated the extreme noise level that may be as a result of motorcycles. And what we learned then was that every decibel reader is not the same. They do have to be calibrated. We do not have enough in the city, and I believe the police department at the time only had 1. So I'm not seeing a considerable increase in the availability of that equipment, either for code enforcement or police department. So how is it being addressed? Or is it? If someone can pull up a decibel reader on their iPhone, is that as accurate as one of those handheld ones that the police department would have?
So I think those are very good questions, and I think we'll ask staff. But I do want to clarify, those are problems we have currently. Without this legislation, we have those questions about how to enforce our noise ordinance. So this legislation is not going to compound that, because if amended, the leaf blower and the high frequency are just prohibitions. There's no sound level assessment that needs to be made, so you don't have to worry about a decibel reader. The other thing this legislation does is regarding measuring, it basically says that it says allowable levels, it says the noise levels from a boat on the water shall be measured at any point on land. So what it does is clarify how those sound levels should be measured when conducting enforcement on the water. So that's the area where, again, it doesn't necessarily compound things as long as this procedure works for us. It's a matter of, we have to work out this issue in general with our sound meters. It's been a long-standing issue. So to that question and to the Alderwoman's question, do we know if we have the sound meters that are calibrated correctly to do this enforcement properly with or without this legislation?
Assistant City Attorney Fulton may want to supplement what I'm about to say, but it is part of the staff report that says that the cell phone meters are not nearly as accurate as a regular meter. And several months ago, in response to an inquiry from Alderwoman Pindell Charles, who maybe had anticipated this legislation, she asked me if the police department had received updated technology as far as their readers. She thought that money had been appropriated towards that, and I looked into that, and the answer is no, they have not, in the last 5 years or so, had new technology, new technological advances in their readers, so they have the same older ones. I'm not aware that we do have readers that would be accurate and could be calibrated, but do you know any differently?
I don't know. And this would precisely be one of the issues that I would run into if I was relying on a private individual's decibel reader. I just have no idea about the calibration of those things. And that goes beyond just decibel readers, but that goes with all sorts of...
You're not trained on that at law school?
No, not regularly at least. But, machines like that need to be calibrated. That's a simple defense that anyone would walk into court and say, how do I know it's calibrated? I can't imagine they'd be particularly difficult to calibrate if the city did have a couple of them lying around.
Well, and again, I think these are really good questions, but really personally, I think they should be treated separately from this legislation, because those questions are there no matter what. And I think, frankly, that's more of a question of the city manager's office. How are you going to, because these code standards, the noise standards are in the code right now. And from what I'm hearing is that we don't have a clear process set up as far as how to enforce the code we currently have, which I think is why my colleague from Ward 8 is concerned, well, why are we potentially, in some ways, adding a little bit to it when we don't even have a solid plan for how to enforce our current
Currently,
noise
if
standards.
it's construction related, that's clear. Department of Planning and Zoning takes care of that. We did that with Parkside Preserve. There were some noise violations that occurred at night operating heavy machinery during construction, and code enforcement took care of those complaints. But they seem to be, the other complaints, which are usually in the evening, are handled by the police department, according to Planning and Zoning. And that's included in the staff report.
And if I could speak to that, Mr. Chair.
Let me see, Alderwoman Finlayson, were you done with the floor?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
So, police primary objective is to prevent or respond to crime situations. And so I've had constituents that have called in noise complaints, and the response is, we don't have any officers available now, they'll get to it as they can, which I totally understand. And in fact, again, I think this is why we wanted to have included with all legislation the staffing impact. I get it that we can't have, well, first of all, the planning and zoning is already up to their level, saturated level, but they go home at night, as do I. Police don't, but they're going to triage this and they'll get to it as they can, if they can. But it should not be, in my view, their top priority, which means that a lot of citizen complaints never get addressed. Now, I take your point. These are issues that are extant right now, and we shouldn't not pass the ordinance because our current situation is also failing, but this will exacerbate it. And right now, the budget is being formed. And right now is the time, I believe, for us on the council, even though we're not allowed to participate in the budget until it's all decided in April or May, I think now is the time to say, these are staffing issues that we will look at when the budget comes to us, because we think we are understaffed in the area of enforcement. And if you come to us with a tightly balanced budget and you don't respond to these staffing issues, I'm not going to be inclined to pass the budget. We've got to address it. And these are constituent satisfaction issues. These are the things, at least for mine, I may have the most raucous constituents in the city, but these are the things that drive them crazy, because these are things that bother them when they're trying to go to sleep at night, and they don't get what they feel like is a response from the city. On the other side of the equation, I don't think the city really is equipped to respond. And I don't think we're giving them that equipment or that staff. So again, I'm not going to quibble with the ordinance, and I'll probably recommend, well, I might recommend that we postpone till we get some clarification, but I'm probably going to recommend approval because overall I agree with the intent. But I think now at ordinance time is when we really have to hold people's feet to the fire, the administration's feet to the fire. We're working, doing our job as legislators, but you've got to work to make sure that our legislation has meaningful application. So end of soapbox.
Alderwoman Finlayson?
I agree with Alderman Arnett, and what comes to my mind is quality of life issues. You know, we have to weigh these quality of life issues like this particular one and other things such as public safety. So how do we marry the two, or how do we make sure in our budget process that we are funding those requirements and then those quality of life issues? I would hope that we would postpone this legislation until we get all of the answers that have been queried today, and I'm sure we'll get more in other committees. But there are just too many unanswered questions. And to put more on the backs of already, and you've heard me say this a number of times, to put more expectation on those who are already at capacity I think is a recipe for failure. We're not going to be able to live up to the expectation that's set. So please, I think we should consider postponing it until we can figure out how to do it. And, you know, maybe we just take out the noise portion as far as its quality of life issues and just keep the equipment type issues in the prohibition on equipment. So that's my thought.
Thank you. So I currently am not very supportive of postponement because we brought up these same exact issues last time we heard the legislation, which is why we postponed it to today. And so either we did not get what we needed from staff as far as an updated staff report, or we didn't do a good job of documenting our exact questions. But I also think that we're conflating some issues because we could take this legislation in segments. And for example, if we just look at, again, if we look at the Amendment 3, which simplifies the language to, it changes section C, which lists about prohibited things. It's related to noise. It doesn't involve measuring noise levels, but it's related to it. So it's in the noise section. But it states that the following are prohibited for sale and use in the city. One would be gas-powered leaf blowers. Second would be high-frequency sound emitters designed and used for pest deterrence. And that's it. So that in itself, I think, is I'd like to have some discussion about, because again, that does not involve the use of a sound meter. It's simply a prohibition on use. Now, I think it is still going to involve some amount of enforcement, right? Similar to what we did with the phone ban. And so I think that's something we could use some more description on. But I don't want to get too wrapped around the axle of sound meter related to these two particular things. So I guess the question for the city manager's office is, can you explain more about how those prohibitions will be enforced? What kind of education, what kind of workload do you envision for complying with this prohibition if it were to pass?
So per these prohibitions that as we've said in the staff report, those are most likely going to fall under the code enforcement, Department of Planning and Zoning, for these two things, for the gas-powered leaf blowers and high-frequency sound emitters designed for pest deterrence. And I know that it's just pest and not other animal. Mm-hmm. You're still allowed to use them for dogs or...
No, I think we'll have to work that in.
Okay.
To a new law.
Yeah, and pest including both
Pest
deer or whatever you're trying to do there. And then, as we did with the polystyrene foam ban, there was a grace period. This legislation provides, from the date of passage, 6-month grace period before it kicks in, and that's to use up your inventory. You may have gas blowers or other devices that you sell for the retail establishments. And what we did was, of course, there was a press release describing what legislation had passed, who it would impact, what the grace period was, what the enforcement would be, what the fines would be. Then we also followed up with letters to the retail establishments that sold these types of products. We sent out several media, social media, informational pieces, so to all city. And then we followed up with the businesses again about a month before enforcement would start to take place. With the polystyrene foam ban, we had some reports initially that establishments were not abiding by the ordinance, which I followed up with a phone call. I gave them a warning the first time. There were a couple that did receive fines after they disregarded or pretend not to know. So we did issue fines a couple of times, and we've only had about one since then. The county's not reported any when they do their inspections, because I think people have used up their inventory and they're just not ordering polystyrene anymore for their establishment. So
I think that one was probably from me.
What's that?
That one complaint was probably from me.
No. And I don't think that was the one. So it would be a similar type of campaign. We would be notifying directly those we think were impacted, a general city informational campaign, and follow up with retail establishments.
Okay, so,
And in this case with gas leaf blowers, also the landscaping companies, we'd have to do the same kind of education with them.
okay, so there's going to be an initial workload requirement for the, for the first probably year, right? As far as education and enforcement. So you said plan and zoning, so that means if somebody, sees their neighbor having somebody with a gas-powered leaf blower, they would call code enforcement and they would send out one of their inspectors.
Yes.
And again, they don't need sound meters, so they'll just go out, oh, it's gas-powered, and then they'll, send a warning or a notice or a violation, whatever it is, to the.
So there's a warning that's allowed, and then you can issue a citation, and then there's a double fine for repeat violations.
Right. And I think this will be more normal place because I think somebody sent me this news article, Washington DC's and Montgomery County have already passed.
Yeah, Montgomery County and DC have passed them, and the staff report, I added the portion about the leaf blowers in here, the several paragraphs. I mean, that's the trend in cities and towns now, is eliminating the use of gas-powered leaf blowers entirely. And in 2024, a number of several other cities and towns goes into effect, including Montgomery County.
Right.
But as Assistant City Attorney Fulton had a comment on the need for a additional nighttime inspector anyway.
For this particular portion, for the
For
leaf
not
blowers
just
and the.
blowers, but sound and other things in general, so something for you to consider.
Well, I don't want to conflate that yet. Is that related to the leaf blower and the
No, it's not.
sound? Okay, so put a pin in that. We'll come back. But I want to ask the committee is that explanation acceptable to you as far as being able to act on this amendment, or do you want more details from staff as far as that impact for this particular component of the legislation, the leaf blower and the sound emitters?
I guess my question has to do with, I'm good with the prohibition on the gas-powered leaf blowers, but this says the sale and use of in the city. What comes to my mind is a hardware store who's on the edge of our city with several thousand residents just beyond the city limits. I just need to understand why the sale.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the approach we've used for the phone ban, for example, because we did that before the county. We also used that when we banned certain fertilizer. This is actually, I think,
Fertilizer.
before my term on the council, but banned fertilizer. That was banned for sale. We've also banned, I think, coal tar sealant on, actually, I can't remember if that's use or sale, but in any case, that's kind of the approach we've taken with some things. I'm certainly open to having that conversation, but that's at least my intention of why I had that in there.
That just to me seems to be a little, a step beyond the sale. Prohibition, I can understand. The sale, especially with the layout of our city. And I know others do different things at different times. But that's my thought on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear you on that, but I guess I'm just trying to wrestle with, like, for example, one of the other things we're working on with Alderman Schandelmeyer is another plastic bag ban. So the question would be, are we going to just ban those for city residents or allow county residents who want to buy groceries in plastic bags to do that from the grocery store? It just gets to be a little complicated when it comes to enforcement, I think, that, city residents can, but city residents can't, but county residents can. That's my one concern with it.
Well, and to me, that means that begs the question of why eliminating the sale completely. Eliminating the use in the city, yes, but we have too many residents that are in close proximity to the city, and I'm thinking about all of the Annapolis Neck community be impacted by this. And I think with some of our other prohibitions, the county was doing or moving in the same direction. So, and maybe, you know, that's the effort there, but that just seems like a hardship to me. So,
No, again, I hear you. My two responses to that would be, one, I think if we do that, it sends a confusing message to residents, city or county, city especially, who show up, oh, well, it's prohibited in the city, but I can still buy it in the city, in a city store. It just sends a mixed message, because then they may think, oh, well, maybe I can use it in the city if I can buy it in the city. The second thing is, you know, another part of this besides noise is just the environmental footprint of the emissions from leaf blowers, which were documented in the staff report as far as the amount of emissions they cause. So if it's bad for the planet, why should we go ahead and say, oh, well, we're going to sell these devices that are polluting our planet? No, it's okay if you use them in the county. You can buy them in the city and use them in the county, but if they're bad, they're bad. Let's just put a ban on them, is my thoughts. But
I think you are stepping beyond also. And I'm not sure that we can control what the county residents do. You know, please don't paint a picture as if I'm not concerned about the environment in the city and outside. I am looking at the impact that it has on our citizenry. Okay, so yeah, absolutely, prohibit them in the use in the city of annapolis. I just think it's different with the sale piece of it. And I think if the residents surrounding the city are aware of this, then we would hear from them. I contend they're not aware, because no one, not even the owner of our local hardware store, came to speak about this. So that probably didn't know about it.
well, he mentioned it to me.
But
I'm sure he did.
I said he mentioned it to me. I know he doesn't like that for sale component either. But again, how's it different from what we did with the fertilizer or the foam ban?
It doesn't.
okay, well, it doesn't, but that doesn't make it right just because we did it before. It doesn't make
Well,
it fair. Maybe I should say right, it doesn't make it fair. But if the communication is going to be as extensive as described, then our residents will be aware. So it won't be, you know, an unfair burden on them, so. But
Yeah.
that's
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair,
Alderman?
if I may.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry. I may be able to address Alderwoman Finlayson's concern. It may not address your concern fully, but it could be amended, the legislation could be amended to require establishments selling gas-powered leaf blowers to clearly display a sign that says may not be used within the limits, city limits. That is part of a public education campaign as well. Someone comes in, they don't know about this, as many people don't know about legislation that's passed, and they see a sign that's clearly displayed.
Well, I'd be curious to see if Montgomery County or Washington, D.C. had this issue, because, I mean, for the stores that are right on the border, are they saying, oh, you can carry this item if you're on the border of D.C., border of Montgomery County, as long as you only sell to, or I don't know. I guess I'd have to look. Do you know if Montgomery County?
That's not a fair comparison. Annapolis is 7 square miles. DC has hardware stores, tons of them, and close proximity. So I'm not sure
I just don't see, if we've acknowledged that it's no different from what we did with the foam or the fertilizer, I don't see what's caused the sudden change in position.
I think I explained my concern.
Okay, well, so do you know in DC or Montgomery County, did they prohibit sale or is it just use?
It says it's sale. They can't, I'm sorry, in Montgomery County, they'll be illegal to sell as of July 1st, 2024. And illegal to use exactly 1 year later. So they banned sale and use.
Sale first and then
Yeah,
use.
and then use in their case. Outright bans are in effect in DC, Miami.
Oh, Jackie, make sure you get in the mic. Can't hear you.
Outright bans are in effect in DC, Miami Beach, Burlington, Vermont, Evanston, Illinois. California will end the sale of gas-powered blowers summer 2024, and Portland and Seattle, Washington are doing the same.
Okay, and you said off mic, I think that DC, or
Montgomery County is banning gas-powered leaf blowers as of July 1, 2024, and then making them illegal to use on July 1, 2025, a year later.
sale first and then.
Sale
use.
first, then use.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've kind of made my position known too. We have two alternate positions on that point. Alderman Arnett.
So I feel a little guilty, but the reason I like this amendment is because it finesses a lot of problems that I have with the section C on page 3. It doesn't make those issues go away, but it does finesse them. As far as the sale or not, I can see the either way. But here's the thing that gives me pause is the high frequency sound emitters. You know, a lot of people buy these things that go on the front of their car and whistle to drive the deer away. And they may buy them coming here from Minneapolis or Maine or whatever. Are we really going to enforce that? I mean, we may not sell them here, and that's one thing. But I mean, that kind of carries me back to my enforcement issue. But nevertheless, I would be happy to make a motion that we accept Amendment 3 for Ordinance 2823. I do have also some concerns about how we monitor the sales. I haven't looked lately, but the last time I went to Home Depot looking for fertilizer, I didn't see any signs saying you can't use fertilizers with phosphorus and nitrogen in Annapolis. Maybe I didn't look at the package close enough. Maybe they don't sell that kind of fertilizer anymore. But, we're back into the whistling in the wind kind of thing, doing the right thing, but maybe not in the right way. But anyway, I make a motion that we accept amendment number 3.
Well, I'm not going to accept the motion right now because we only have 5-10 minutes left, 8 minutes, and Alderwoman Finlayson needs to go. I don't want to try to rush this through because I know she has concerns and questions about some of it, and I think she supports some of it as well. But I know you have questions too.
Very good
so-
chairman. You're considerate of your committee members.
Do you have particular questions for the city manager's office?
That's
that
what I
you
was
need
gonna
me
get
Can
to.
you specify those for me, please?
That's what I was going to get to next. So I think, so we're going to I will accept a motion to postpone, and then we can go through some of the questions.
Let's postpone the ordinance or the amendment?
Postpone this deliberation on this legislation until our next meeting.
Okay, so moved.
Second?
All those in favor, please.
But I will
Aye.
volunteer to give you a list of my questions so that we can give
Thank
them
you,
to
and-
staff.
yeah.
And I should have done that. I admit I didn't really dig into this until today, so I remiss. But I think for all of our legislation in the future, it really would be the considerate thing to do when we have questions, to generate a list, give it to the sponsors and the staff as soon as we can. I think we're all running around in our part-time pay, full-time jobs, trying to get to the legislation.
Or full-time retirements.
Right.
And
So
volunteer work.
I made a motion to postpone.
I think that was seconded, so all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. As far as questions for staff, so I think there weren't so many questions about, I think the committee's fine with prohibiting the use of those gas-powered leaf blowers and the high-frequency sound emitters. However, I do want to state, I guess if somebody could relate for law office, could you make a note to, we're going to need the Amendment 3 revised to say, instead of pest deterrence, I think just put animal deterrence, because that'll capture the dog part, the pet dog part of it. Because some people may say, well, dogs aren't pests, so it doesn't apply.
Right.
certainly would never call my dog a pest, but some of my neighbors might. So the questions I guess we have had have to deal with some of the enforcement when it comes to the decibel readers. So I think,
And staff.
and staffing.
Staffing.
Oh, okay, yeah, so, yes, thank you. So as far as the prohibition, if you could provide a little bit of clarification as far as your expectations for workload with the initial education component, with the initial and ongoing enforcement levels and the associated staff impacts, and then if there are any concerns from the law office as far as enforcing those prohibitions, now's the time to know. Is there anything else? Oh, yeah, Alderwoman Finlayson, sorry, I see you.
Yeah, and maybe this is included in your list, but I think it would be good to have a history of these infractions, or at least the calls for service for both inspectors and APD, just to see what type of workload we can expect. And in that way, we can also see what the true staffing implications will be.
In the staff report, Alderman Finlayson, it does say that it's $40. It costs this police department $40 per response. Did you see
I
that?
read that, and I don't believe it for a second.
Yeah, I don't either.
Oh, yeah, I did read that, and I'm sorry, I meant to mention that earlier. I don't think it's accurate, I'm not sure where that number came from.
Okay, I'll double check on that, because
But
I'll
anyway,
double
we're
check.
not gonna debate
That's
it.
that's a bargain.
Yeah, right, I know.
Way to help us to come up with some real numbers there. that
So
might-
we'll multiply their calls for service by $40 and come up with their new budget.
That's right.
So we'll look into that to verify that number and the other questions you pose about, I mean, the police department says that they rarely get these calls, and when they do, they give warnings and people comply, but we'll get the history for you.
Yeah, I suspect their complaints mostly have to do with parties and those kind of violations, unauthorized events. But yeah, it would still be good to get a handle on that. As far as the decibel meters, what kind of clarity do we need on? So in this case, the other part of this legislation deals with measuring sound levels from the water. I think if we could get a specific, I guess, paragraph, some kind of answer from the law office as far as if you have concerns about how that's written, if you think it needs to get improved. Again, the intention is to help clarify that, how we would measure sound violations that happen on the water, because the code, I think, currently is silent to that. So this is trying to enable enforcement of party boats if they get out of hand, because that was one of the concerns. Oh, they're going down Residential Creek. We don't want them causing disruption. So you have a little bit of time till our next meeting. Was there anything else the committee wants answered for the next?
I think that's it for me. I did notice the first Alderwoman O'Neill's amendment, which is the time limit, or the time.
Right.
Which I like, so,
Yeah.
but no,
I will put together a set of my notes and send it to you, Mr. Chair, and you can decide what you want to pass forward.
Okay. Alderwoman, if you have another minute, is there, and so, all right, I'm going to close the section on that legislation. Regarding the street and park hours, is there anything you want to make known now as far as questions we need answered for the next meeting before you go, or do you want to just wait until the next meeting?
I don't think I have any questions at this point, but I didn't have any questions for the last one either until get to it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure
Okay.
I have any questions right now.
Okay, fair enough. Alderman Arnett, did you have anything else
I have lots of questions.
on
but-
that one?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can, maybe we get those to staff.
Yeah,
Or actually, we can let the Alderwoman go if we want to just get those questions on the record
sure.
for preparation. Is that
Well, if
okay,
that's
Alderwoman?
okay with,
Yes, could I ask a question, actually? I'm looking at just the description. Could we hear from Alderwoman Kendall Charles? I'm not sure what ward Amos Garrett Park is in. Is that in 1, 2, 4, it's not at 4.
2, I'm assuming.
And from, I guess it's either 5 or 6 for Truxton Park. I'd like to hear from the aldermen, from those wards, as to how this is
Oh, okay.
impacting them, because I know Chambers Park. And so I really would like to know how this legislation is going to impact the work that they do.
Okay.
So, thank you. Sorry I have to
Thank you.
run. Plane to catch, so I'll be there to see you guys in the morning.
No problem.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Safe travels.
Thanks. Take care.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If this is a street end park legislation. It's not referring to other parks, so.
Only street and
Yeah,
parks. Okay.
so, yeah, to the part about Truxton, because Truxton has after-hours lighted courts, things like that, but it's not street end, but the boat ramp is street end. But people often come in after dusk, after hours, after they've been out on their boat, they leave their car and their trailer there, so there needs to be leeway for that use. And then also, City Dock will be a park and will be lighted, and we expect programming there at night, and expect the businesses will be happy that people are there at night and getting ice cream or going to a restaurant or shopping or whatever they're doing, and it gets dark now at 4:30, so it's not late. So just some considerations on that, if this was truly meant for just street ends, and whether we want people or not enjoying our street end parks after hours.
Yeah, I think the committee's going to have some concern. I don't want to get into too many details as far as content of the legislation, but is there anything that you think you need staff to
Well,
work
I
on?
think the big question is, what are we trying to fix and who are we trying to fix it for? I mean, this strikes me as being fairly similar to paddlecraft racks, which, by the way, you couldn't use after dark and until dawn on street-end parks if this legislation passes in its current form. But I really want to go to first principles. What is it we're fixing? And who are we fixing it for? I'm not particularly favorably disposed to this in Ward 8, and I do think I have more street-in parks than any other ward. I also don't think I was consulted about my attitude on this, which is another failing, but I really want to get to the big picture. I do have lots of specific comments, as you might guess, but I want to know what it is we're trying to fix. If it's noise at the Tucker Street boat ramp, I do feel like we can drill down and try to find ways, if there's specific issues, to not do citywide ordinances that trample over a whole bunch of other kinds of issues. Same way if it's paddle racks for people on Prince George's, which I don't want to see legislation or paddle racks everywhere, so people on Prince George's. I wish we'd gotten that comment from the lady that she sent to us after the meeting. That would have really been very helpful. And I do have some empathy for that particular situation. I'm not sure that the legislation will fix it for them, because if a whole bunch of people from the county get to the racks first, they're still not going to be able to rent. And so what do they do then? So I think this pilot, and I said it during my testimony, I support doing a pilot. Let's figure out what the demand for this is and how we're going to administer it. I look at the mooring buoys as something that could be very informative about the number of mooring buoys we need to satisfy the demand. But in any event, specific to this legislation, I'd really like to get a better understanding about what it is we're fixing before we pull this down on the entire city. I can tell you that I go down to my street-in park after dark. It's fun to watch the boats coming in with their lights on, and I would be prohibited from doing that. I can tell you that people go to street-in parks to watch the lights parade, which is after dark. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Now, I can also tell you that the street-in park on my street is used for drug transfers at 2 or 3 in the morning. So there are some things we might not want to have happen there.
Well, it's
but-
already prohibited.
Yeah, right.
All right, so that's, so I guess the one question, Ms. Jackson, would you be willing to contact the sponsor and ask, let her know the committee would like just a description of need? Or, how should I phrase it?
What is the
Purpose,
problem we're
purpose and
addressing?
intention,
Yeah,
yeah. And let her know, it'll be on our agenda for our next committee meeting. All right, and so basically, we're not taking action on that today. And.
oh no, I'm getting logon error. Does that mean my Granicus ID is run out again? Jesus H. Christ. Can we get rid of this horrible system?
All right. Ms. Guile, do you have anything you'd like to report on today? Do we have questions?
We have a pretty thorough report.
Yeah, we do have a pretty thorough report. Just want to know if there's anything in particular the committee wanted to ask about.
Do you,
Do you have any questions?
Well, I did have one that wasn't on the list, which was a report on the status of investigating the fly ash on the Spa Road parcel. It's my understanding that the Choice Neighborhood application has gone forward. We are apparently partners, but you would think as partners, we would see what the application said. I'd like to know if it has gone forward with Spa Road as a part of that application. And if that is the case, I think it's very urgent that we know the status of the fly ash at the Spa Road facility.
So first part of that, can we, I don't know who could get it for
I
us,
already
but
sent-
did somebody get a copy of the application for us?
oh, okay. I sent an inquiry, but I have not received a response from planning and zoning regarding whether they sent the CNI application in without any testing for fly ash there. And also, that message went to Director Vogel as well in Public Works, just because they would perform the testing for fly ash, whether that testing has been done or is planned. So I'm just waiting for a response from them. But you want to see the CNI application?
Yeah,
All right.
if we're
Can you
partners.
add a discussion about the CNI
So
grant at the
you will
next
need
meeting?
Director of Planning and Zoning for that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we'll add that for discussion at the next meeting, and presumably since planning and zoning is not here, they'll join us for our next meeting for a development update.
Other than that, thank you for the report. It was very informative and easier to follow
I
than
thought
the
it would be.
spreadsheet.
I thought so, yeah, because it's easier to point out the new things on it. I'll maintain the spreadsheet as well, because it's comprehensive, but I just thought for informing you monthly, this is much easier.
I will also warn you, I'm going to send you information on a sheep herder who chews grasses for pollinator parks that,
You know,
Does he do it selectively? Does he know which plants to chew?
they chew them all. Sheep,
I know, that was the one issue that Fish and Wildlife Service raised about goats or sheep, is that they're not selective
right.
in what they chew.
And so in the Altiplano in South America, they banned sheep farming. And all of a sudden, first of all, the mountain lions came back because the natural, it's not llamas or alpacas, it begins with a Y. Anyway, they came back, but all of the grasses came back. Same thing with the grasses on the savanna in Africa when there was this big increase in wildebeest, which led to a big increase in dung beetles who roll the dung and bury it, which fertilizes, so all the grasses would come back there. Now, I was told by Mr. Information Bob Agee, there's some virus that's attacking dung beetles, so we're in trouble. Anyway,
good.
yeah, sheep definitely chomp it down. Again, I think goats do too. Sheep
Cows, too.
supposedly don't climb on the panels, but goats do. But in any event, I'm still anxious about poisoning 3 times.
Right, so let me just give you a quick update on that one, which is I think one of the first highlights I put on here was the habitat, pollinator habitat. And after I drafted this, Racine Hodo met with GIS people over at MIT, and they identified about 10 acres of potential areas based on location and slope. And however, those are scattered 10 acres. We really need, as you remember from the site visit, we need a contiguous area they function the best for pollinators. So we'll look at that once they're going to make some tweaks to what they came up with. And then Racine and I need to put together a proposal that can be turned into an RFP that we can get going. Because it would be ideal to get this project moving in the spring so that we can do fall planting
Yes.
and have it come up.
The spring 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But I've forgotten to ask each time, what are the pollinators that we're planting? For example, clover is a pollinator that's
Yes.
very popular with bees and sheep, by the way.
Right.
But I have visions of butterfly bushes and
Yes.
all kinds of other things.
So-
So do we have a list of,
Well, that's part of the project will be for the contractor that we select to tell us what will grow best in that soil. You gotta test the soil first, pH, et cetera, see what it's made of, to see what plants will best grow there. And then, of course, we have considerations about root depth because of the cover and whether that's a real concern or not. What I've been told by Fish and Wildlife is that the plants tend to go out rather than bore down, which is the same for our trees here when we get complaints from residents in the historic district about large tree roots. The arborist and our Historic Preservation Commission chief have both said that the roots will tend to go the path of least resistance away before they'll try to bore through a solid surface. So that may not be a real concern, but we'll have experts to tell us that. And then I envision then a mix, depending on where, of the taller growing plants. And because our panels are low, those areas are not conducive to the taller growing plants. Those would be areas where clover, which is also attractive to certain pollinators, but a very limited group of pollinators that could be planted in the lower areas, and that doesn't grow very high at all, ever. Even it requires very little mowing, maybe once a year even. But other areas would be more attractive to a diverse array of pollinators and small animals, chipmunks, et cetera.
are we intending to attract bird pollinators? Like
Unless we hear differently from council or anyone else, we're attempting to attract both bird and bee species pollinators, not wasps attacking, anything that'll come after you, but things that pollinate plants, move that pollen to other plants. As you well know, Alderman Arnett, the whole species is dependent on insects and plants to pollinate not only flowers and things that look nice, but our food as well. And without insects, in the circular chain of life, humans don't survive either.
So no murder hornets or killer bees?
No,
Yeah,
no killer bees.
I don't know, those murder hornets, I think we should be filming them. I mean, that would,
Ground wasps have been
Wipe out
killed.
Well, it's interesting because some species of bees have developed a resistance.
oh, I know, it's
a way
cool.
to combat
Would
that.
they
Swarm them.
swarm them and kill them with overheating? That's,
Yeah.
go bees.
All right, so I have one other thing to mention, I think, to see if the committee, there's just two of us right now, but thought just occurred to me, would be interested in adding to our next agenda, we can invite Eileen and Burr to have a discussion about the city, and Scott to discuss the city dock plan from an environmental perspective, because there are some things I want to dig into more after our meeting last night that, for example, do we really need to have all that parking at the end of it still? There may
I'd
be
like
other
to
things we
discuss
can.
that, but I'd like to discuss the other end. Are we really going to let
Whether they need all
the
that
park
parking.
flood?
Well,
And
They want more
by
funds.
2050, it'll be permanently underwater? Why would we let that go?
well, again,
And I thought
they
there
mentioned
was-
last night the Dutch did that with thousands of acres in their land
But
because
that's when the
Beyond,
storm
all
level
the way up to,
recedes.
like, where
But by
Marquez is.
2050, we're saying we're having 365 days. That means that'll be
That's the way
permanently
it goes.
underwater.
No,
They show it
no,
here.
because that's still getting raised in elevation.
Green, it's not right.
It's not
Well, I
going to
want
be
to hear
completely
more about
low.
it. And I
And I
thought
think
the other
with
question that was
Hillman,
really
put
good
so much extra space
is
in there,
about the
it's never
flooding
full.
for the
It's never full.
walkway, gangplank, whatever you want to call it, where the boats are moored. I think we may be doing floating pilings or things
People got
on the
used to
pilings.
using it.
But if
They
you
were
step
too
off your boat into 2-3 feet of water at the dock level, so I'm wondering why we haven't addressed that. I know it's more money, but why?
Well, we can get into those, and I'll have
But the
other
big one for me
questions, too.
is the trees. And
Yeah.
it's the trees versus the boat show. Because I've not heard really great things about trees that live in wooden boxes that get
Oh,
lifted up. and
that's an
moved out.
awful idea. I mean, one of the things we've been talking a lot about Netherlands coming up, but you should see all their parks that have trees all over them, but they're still utilized for fairs and bazaars and whatever else, markets. So it's something the the boat show can certainly work around if they need to. But in any case,
But I
can
think we
we
should-
add to the agenda a discussion? I know there's a lot on our next agenda, so tentatively. So we would need Eileen Fogarty, Burr, Vogel, and
Brian?
Hmm?
Brian Adams?
oh yeah, we could get Brian tentatively. We'll touch base before the meeting to figure out. Might need to narrow that down. Okay, and anything else for Ms. Guile? For the good of the order?
No, but I want to both apologize, but thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that when we get into these ordinances and a level of detail, it feels like we're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, but quite frankly, I'd really rather deal with these things before we promulgate it and rather than, as much as we can anticipate, rather than after passing it and find out it didn't work and have to come back. I thought you were very considerate of Alderwoman Finlayson's questions, which I think are, valid concerns. So
Yeah, of course.
I know we want to get these things moving and agitating to get some things off of our agenda, but I do think this committee work is where we should get into this level of detail. And so I apologize, but I don't feel terribly guilty about getting into the level of detail that we did.
No,
But I do
Yeah.
appreciate your being a good steward of the committee, so thank you for that.
you're welcome. No need to apologize. You're talking to the guy who argues for hours over one word at our council meetings sometimes. All right, so is there, and I guess our next meeting, we may end up need to do it a little longer because we've had a couple of short meetings in a row. We need to get some stuff done.
Yeah, or maybe we might need to schedule an extra meeting.
Oh, so we need to schedule a new one? Okay, all right, well, if you could work with Alderwoman Finlayson, figure out some dates, to be determined for our next one. Oh, yeah, because we had to yield it to, there's the City Hall open house for the holidays, so we had to cancel our meeting. We'll get it rescheduled, though. If we can get it rescheduled before the next council meeting, which is later in December, I think.
No, we only have one in December, that's December 12th.
Oh, the
Because
12th.
Christmas is the 20th.
Well, that gives us 2 weeks. Maybe we can find something. Okay. Anyway, we'll work on that afterwards. Is there any kind
I
of?
just want to mention, it's on my list, but the public water access plan that Department of Planning and Zoning has been working on for a while. We had a presentation to staff yesterday, to the staff that's worked on it with planning and zoning, and we made recommendations which will be incorporated. Then we'll have a final plan. It gets into use issues, like what amenities are there and what should be there, what the residents want. There are 3 focus groups were convened, meetings of these groups. And so I suggested that there be a work session. And because, as you mentioned, reminded everyone at City Council on Monday, we talked about where we're going to site the kayak racks. We should be talking to the aldermen where we're going to do that. And so I said, it's the same kind of thing with the use of the parks and the wards, your particular wards. So Planning and Zoning thought that was a good idea, so they'll schedule a work session with council.
Good. Okay. And For some reason, that made me think of upcoming budget, which I think is probably being worked on now by the
I think
administration.
it's pretty much finished.
But we need to start to get the wheels turning on that to a certain degree with us. I need to give that some more thought. But if there's any, I just wanted to relay, if Mr. Adams, for example, has recommendations for the tree part of it, I made a list when he came and spoke about things I want to look to recommend for the budget, but I think it'd be helpful if he could put together another list and we can talk about that specifically on the committee.
And I have a draft, it's on my list, a draft electric vehicle fleet strategy recommendations that I need to finalize with climate change consulting, and then I'll be able to provide it. But I think as part of that, what comes out of that are maybe some more money is needed for purchase of EVs as replacement cars in our fleet. I mean, they're getting cheaper, and there are more tax incentives for buying them. But what I often hear is that they're too expensive, or there's not enough money, or there's not availability. The availability issue is becoming less of an issue with supply chain. And the cost of lithium batteries is coming down, and there are more tax incentives for buying them. And with Tesla making decreases in their price on Teslas, the other car companies brought their prices down a bit too to be competitive. So it's becoming a little bit easier, but I'll have to get it together again with the fleet maintenance. I mean, the fleet, I can't remember his title at the moment, but the program manager for the fleet, and determine where we are for 2024 purchases and into 2025.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that prices have gone down quite a bit. I mean, average price of a car in general is now up to $50,000, but you can get EVs for $30,000. So the one thing I would, I guess, point out to you is that I know the Department of Transportation is looking at getting those smaller EV shuttles, but they're only 3-season. You can't use them in the winter. And the price, frankly, was a lot higher than I thought. You can actually get a nice 8-seat EV for probably just around the same price that you can use all season. So just to point that out, but also just to say, I think I've been a little hesitant as a committee to get involved in some transportation, but obviously EVs are related, but also I think cycling is something we may need to talk a bit more as a committee, because cars have an environmental impact, especially non-EVs, right, for emissions.
Right.
So I think we'll have to factor that in some of our conversation. I know that'll be on my mind for the budget. Okay, so anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn?
Nope.
Okay.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
So I've got a voice message from Hill.